You done anything cool this week?
Let's
Why don't you talk
see.
about that for a second? I'll be right back.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. I mentioned earlier that earlier today I had a meeting with Fable and Cassie about Anachronistic, and well, like one thing I wanted to talk about, because again I couldn't hold it anymore, is I did want to talk a little bit about The Withered, which is the interim episode that got posted on the 15th. I didn't get to talk about it much on social media because I was busy with Fable's thing, and I'll probably throw some posts about it soon. But yeah, so in order to buy some time for episode 10, I released a reading of this short story that I wrote in college. And I was sort of talking to it with Fable, because it is the short story I wrote where I think I finally figured out my voice as a writer. And that's been really cool. Oh, thank you for the stretch reminder, the hydrate reminder, and I'll show you your little crab friend, Shiny Zubats. And man, it was really cool looking back at a story that was sort of at the precipice of who I am as a writer now, because there are certainly themes in it that like are very persistent. It's a very metaphysical story. You know, it's got my I'm talking about The Withered, which is the bonus story I released in the Anachronistic feed.
Ooh.
Have you listened to it yet, Jaron?
I have not listened to it yet.
Okay, no worries. What I was saying is that it's essentially like it was the first story I wrote where I think I had my voice as a writer figured out. Because I've written loads and loads and loads of stuff before then. There's a couple of different things I can like point as the first story I wrote. I could say it's a Star Wars fan fiction. If I want to go further back, it was the D. Gray Man fan fiction. If I want to go forward to the first thing I wrote seriously, it was this. It actually is the story that eventually became episode 3 of Anachronistic, the Groundhog Day one. But The Withered came several years later into that, near like at the very end of my college career. And yeah, I had this very strong idea of what I wanted to write, and I wasn't quite sure how to do it. And I kind of think of that story famously as like, of every college assignment I ever had, it was the one I procrastinated on the least, and yet it still wasn't done on time. Like I spent an entire semester writing that story.
Can anyone in chat who has access to Fable's emotes give us some big oofs?
I think I technically do. Do I? Do.
Yeah, but I'm going for audience participation here.
Oh, that's good. That's a better thought.
Thank you, Squirrel.
Thank you, Squirrel. So yeah, I recording the episode is, I'm just gonna look at a stat here. Yeah, so the episode, including the meta recording, like, oh yeah, this is a bonus episode stuff, was 25 minutes. I cut about.
I love this part of the story.
I want to say about half of the original word count for that recording.
You told me this part of the story like when you were hanging out at my place the other day. Please continue. Yeah. I love this part.
So I was reading through it and trying to make sure it was at all passable to be read. And some stuff, some of the prose is a little, old. Like I'm trying not to be like, what's the word? Too critical of my old work.
You're doing it.
But mostly it was fine, except there was this big chunk of the story. And it was a chunk that was sort of weaved throughout the narrative. But it was all like, I kind of think of it as one scene, even though it was broken up. Kind of like how I weave with Anachronistic, like it's what's in Neil's head, it's what's happening in the present, it's back to Neil's head. Like it was broken up in a similar way. And I do think that was, in a way, the like, me trying to break it up that way was sort of the impetus for how I write Anachronistic. But I remember this chunk I just couldn't get right. when I wrote it. And when I first wrote it, I remember this too, is I didn't want to include this part at all. I was about half short on the word count when I thought the story was done, and so I needed to add a bunch of stuff in, and I needed to elaborate on that stuff even past the point I was comfortable with to get the word count I needed for the assignment. And even after that, when I kept trying to clean up the story, maybe for publication or something else for years afterward, I'd take another shot at that part, and it just would not fit. It would not work. It would not feel right in the narrative. And I looked at it, now with about 8 years of experience as a writer, releasing published work that people enjoy and making money off of it. And I read through that part I had such trouble with, and I go, I see the problem with this. It doesn't need to be there at all. And so I ended up just cutting that whole bit, and I think the story is better for it.
I love this story.
Um,
I love that editing's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to have ideas, and it's hard to put those ideas onto paper, either literally or figuratively. And then once those ideas are on paper, it's hard to let go of them. But sometimes it's the right thing for the project. Is this idea is really cool or whatever, it doesn't belong in this story. And you go over here now into the idea box. Even though it's down, even though it's out of your brain and on the literal or figurative paper, let it go sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't belong and it's making it worse. It's okay. It's okay. We've all been through it.
Scorehort says, knowing when to delete your work is not an easy task. I have a fun story of one of the first short stories I ever wrote and discovered I also had a particular writing style. Please share the story, Squirrelhorde. I mean, either the one that you wrote or the story about
in your own
the
time.
story. Yeah. In fact, and it's funny making that change. I've always, specifically, I've always thought of that story as, the first seed of OTL. And the change I ended up making, the cut I ended up making, brings it spiritually a lot closer to OTL too.
Love it.
And I find that kind of funny. I'm like, I knew it didn't belong there. I didn't realize that
you
that
knew, but
applied.
You didn't know.
Yeah. And yeah, no, it was a really cool experience to go through that story again. It also one of the things that I don't even think about it as a thing anymore because I've practiced this so much, especially for Anachronistic. But when I was writing it, one of the challenges I set for myself was this is going to be a story entirely in second person, which it was one of those writing rules that kind of bugged me, and that oh, you don't write stories in second person. People find it too aggressive and you're telling them what to do. No, if you noticed, but all of Anachronistic is technically in second person.
I have noticed that. Hey, the narration of Wild Azaleas is in second person.